Welcome to this episode of Think Again with Beyond Blue. I'm your host, Georgie Harman. We're recording this podcast from Wurundjeri country, and we pay our respects to the traditional owners of these beautiful lands. This episode will be navigating the tricky terrain of disclosing your mental health condition at work, and we'll be taking a closer look at the pressures faced by mental health carers in the workplace. Taking us through all of this is someone I've been lucky to know and work with for nearly 15 years, Backman-Hoyle. Dee is a nationally respected lived experience advocate and organisational development practitioner with decades of experience. She's currently the National Community Engagement Manager for Mental Health Carers Australia, the national peak body. Now, Dee brings a rare mix of strategic insight and lived wisdom. She understands how organisations work, and more importantly, how people fall through cracks. She's known for her no-nonsense attitude, her deep compassion, and her relentless drive to make systems more human. Dee Backman-Hoyle, how long have we known each other?
A long time, Georgie. I'm guessing it's about 15 years. It was when the Mental Health Commission was established.
Absolutely. And you are one of the most respected, fierce family advocates, carer advocates in Australia. What's changed in that 15 years?
Look, I think sadly not a lot. And I think what's tended to happen is that we moved down a very, very person-centred ideology. And probably it needed to happen way back then, that the person was centred in the decision-making. And potentially it's come at a cost. And
a cost to families and carers.
The cost in families and carers. In as much as, and I guess the language as well, you know, we hear the term carers and there's not many carers that like the term carers to start with. We are part of a relationship ecosystem with people we choose to love and who choose to commit to being part of our families as well. So when we hear the term carer, we often think about paid carers, and what we're talking about here is the unpaid carers, the contribution of unpaid carers. So we had this sort of sense of good lived experience, living experience is coming to the front through the consumer movement, have worked so hard to be heard, and they are a force and they are a strong movement. And they had got the traction and the influence in the person-centred approach. The challenge is that in some cases that gave permission for people like clinicians, other types of practitioners to actually say, I'm dealing with someone on this one-on-one interactive, often operationally orientated relationship, and I'm not seeing people within the broader ecosphere of that individual. There's some tokenism around it. There's, you know, do you have people at home that you can talk to? Is there someone in your life, a significant other, etc.? But they're not taken into the equation as to the same degree that, for example, the social emotional wellbeing model would suggest, or a Maori-based model, which is all about relationship and the relationship orientation of support. And that notion and having the dignity to say in those cultures, if you're hurting, we're hurting too.
Yeah.
And not to be told that you're sitting outside the billable activities, for example.
So how does that play out in workplaces?
In workplaces, it's really interesting. You know that we have a large proportion of people who cannot even enter the workplace because of the caring responsibilities that they have. We've got statistics that suggest that 30% of these carers are caring more than 38 hours a week.
Wow, okay.
So
how do you work? Right? How do you fit a job?
Well, you
don't.
You put on a front to be work ready, but you go to work carrying this sense of dread and hypervigilance and an orientation towards keeping things together, but you feel constantly behind the eight ball because you're trying to play the game in the workplace and not be discriminated against. And sadly, Georgie, there is workplace discrimination still.
Yeah.
If not for the people who have significant mental health issues, their families and friends And so it's not built for purpose. From a cultural point of view, there's lots of messaging inside organisations from their communications team, HR and other places, yet when the rubber hits the road and someone says there are significant things taking place in my life at the moment, I need some flexibility, or I need to be able to adapt deliverables, for example, it's often met with we'll decide whether or not we think it's valid or not the person saying, please just trust me with what's going on in my life, it's big.
So in that, you're implying that support people of people who live with mental health challenges, carers in the short form, are choosing still not to disclose the fact that they're supporting someone who lives with a mental health issue.
Many.
Right.
Particularly in high stress environments. So if we think about the professional services space, there is a sense of cocoon that reality away from others because you will be seen as vulnerable. And if you are vulnerable, then we'll start challenging and questioning capability.
Yeah.
And the sense of being observed so closely by people around to who don't understand it. And this is just the reality, Georgie. If you've not lived through it and in it, you don't get it. And there's a lot of sort of sympathy suggestions, but there aren't pragmatic ways that we build fit-for-purpose roles for people while they're coexisting in deep crisis in their family dynamics.
So I want to come back to those sort of pragmatic things that you think would be helpful, because I think, we're ideally, we're talking to decision makers, we're talking to power brokers, we're talking to people within organisations who have the ability to change things. So we'll come back to that. But talk to me about how... what you're hearing from carers around. You talked about, caring's a 24/7 thing, right? And then if you've got a job on top of that, how do you balance those two things? There's innate tension there at the basic level around hours available in the day.
Yeah.
But then you layer into that discrimination, stigma, potentially even some kind of sense of shame, because no one's going to understand me and people are going to think differently about me, or even rage about that. How do you balance that?
I don't think you can.
Yeah.
I think ultimately we have burnout. Ultimately we break, and balancing it really is a wake up on any day and assess the situation.
Yeah.
So we often hear people talk about mental health caring is episodic. That's true for some people. It is a period of time, and then you can have periods of reprieve where that person is safe and where that person has got some wraparound beyond you and your family dynamics. If you've got a healthy, functioning family, that's not everyone. We know that. But then you've got to really work out how you prioritise. Example for me, and I do have permission to share that I have an adult daughter in a crisis at the moment. I'm employed full time, and I'm knocking up about 7 to 12 hours of productive work at the moment because I'm 24/7 caring for someone in crisis. So you do what you can do and you just squeeze in the things that you can do. I'm very fortunate that I work inside an organisation that this is our advocacy, is about families. But I've often questioned what would happen if I was working back in the spaces I've worked in very heavy corporate settings where it is competitive. There are less roles at the top for a lot of people, including older women, and you can be maxed out because you're concerned that you're not putting in. So, I'm one of the more fortunate ones. If I don't work, I don't get paid. Because you only have 10 days carer leave a year. When someone's in crisis, you might need 6-7 weeks.
Yeah.
So there's no pay for that. So then you use all of your other types of sick leave, other types of I guess, eligible pay options, but after a while you run out. So if you're lucky enough to have an organisation that says you can do without pay, and if you're privileged enough, to be frank, that you can do that, then you take the caring role. So it is very, very difficult. It's a tension that is horrible to live in because you're constantly battled with, how do I not let my team down?
Yeah.
Particularly if you've got staff. How do I disclose enough, but not too much, that you feel that your vulnerability will leak out, and mistakes you make become connected to that. A bit like medical overshadowing, that happens in the workplace. The mistakes must be because of the fatigue.
Talk to us about what do you mean by medical overshadowing?
So medical overshadowing, the term is very often used by consumers and their families and friends, that if someone has a deep history of complex mental illness, for example, and they're seen by a medical professional, they tend to get given the option of above the neck or below the neck. What am I looking at now? Below the neck or above the neck? And if their rap sheet, if I call it that, over a long period of time is comprehensive, most professionals will say it's a mental health presentation, not a physical health presentation. But the reality is it could be one of both things. Yeah. But that person is judged by the amount of mental health presentations that they've had. So that's medical overshadowing. So someone could be having a crisis of physical ill health, but that won't be investigated.
Yeah, okay. All right.
So medical overshadowing.
Great. So let's come back to this issue of disclosure. I was quoted in the media, probably 8-9 years ago, maybe even longer, of talking about, and the headline was, Beyond Blue boss says, think again before telling your boss, right? And that got quite a reaction because people were saying, well, you should be encouraging people to disclose in the workplace that they've got mental health issues, illness, and that was specifically about people who lived with mental health conditions, as opposed to their scaffolding, their families, carers, supporters. And I did that very deliberately because I couldn't, in good faith, say, tell your boss, because back in those days, I wasn't confident that would be met with a good response. You've talked a lot about discrimination in the carer workforce and the family workforce. How does that, would you say tell your boss?
I would say it depends.
Okay.
And the it depends is that you have been able to see how others have been treated when they've disclosed, to get a sense of safety that the policies actually translate into meaningful actions. Yeah. Because we have a lot of very good, feel-good policies that say the right thing, and they often sit within the people and culture space, and yet frontline managers, middle managers, anyone who's under the pump to produce anything, whether it's an output of hard deliverables or services, etc., they need everyone absolutely contributing to the best of what they believe is their ability. And often if you are seen as being vulnerable, you will be removed somehow. And it's a ghosting type of experience that happens. No one says to you, look, because of your vulnerability, we actually won't hold this space for you any longer. It just is a slow erode of trust and demonstration of managers who do not understand how to have difficult, sensitive conversations. The fact that someone could be speaking to their manager and saying, I am willingly putting my hand up for some help here. Yeah. If that then gets translated into, I don't deal with those issues, I'll send you to HR or people and culture, that's a huge risk. And, we talk often about suicide prevention. Suicide prevention happens in the moments within conversations. It doesn't happen in a campaign necessarily. So if my manager was able to say to me, hey, you don't have to tell me everything, but I know you, and I know when you're under pressure, I see the impact that that's having on you. What do we need to do to support you? Not, here is the policy, make it retrofit what your situation is right now.
Bang on. Like, this is the thing that I always say to leaders when they ask me this stuff, like, change the question.
Yes.
Or change the statement from, this is what we need from you, this is what our policy allows us to do, these are the guardrails that we've got as an employer, to what do you need from us?
Yeah.
What would good look like? What would help to keep you connected with work?
Yeah.
And being as productive as you can in this time in your life where you're supporting your loved one. Tell us what that looks like, and we'll see what we can do with that.
Yeah.
We'll work together to figure something out, as opposed to, this is the policy, see you later. Or, as you say, death by 1,000 cuts, and all of a sudden you're, in the wilderness or without a job.
Yeah, and Georgie, I go back to, sadly I've been around this space for a long time, and in 1994, when my first husband took his life, by the way, there's only 2 so far, so don't, I'm not Zsa Zsa Gabor, but, when my first husband took his life, I remember my boss coming to me and saying, I'm sorry, I've looked up the bereavement leave, it's 3 days. Given it's 11 o'clock now in the morning, would you like to take this afternoon off as part of those 3 days?
Wow.
And I remember the team I was working with at the time, they were incredible. They rallied around me like some sort of force field of love and just looked at this manager, to be unnamed, and said, go away, go away. This woman has just found out that her husband has taken his own life by suicide, and you are talking about bereavement leave in this moment. And so that for me still sticks, because I think it's still there to a degree. So we're talking about suicide prevention, bereavement is one thing, but trying to coexist and keep someone alive who doesn't want to be alive, and be supportive as you can without losing your stuff at home or at work, it is really, really, really difficult. And it really takes very strong education for managers to be able to have these complex conversations where they're not judging the person and they're not pitying them. There's something in between.
Do you really think those are complex conversations? Do you think we make them more complex than they need to be? I always think about, how would I want to be treated and spoken to in a situation of high stress or tragedy like you've just described? And I just want to be treated like a human. And I'd want to feel like a human was talking to me.
Yeah.
Someone with compassion, empathy, not necessarily understanding, because you can't understand a situation like that often. But I often, again, when I'm talking to leaders in workplaces, I ask, how many of you have got teenage daughters, sons, who are about to enter the workplace? And, often 3/4 of the room puts their hands up. And I'm like, can you, and how many of those, I bet, half of you, and that's probably a generous guess, have your young people experiencing some kind of mental health challenge. And they're about to enter the workplace, the workforce, and start, I'm sure, amazing careers. How would you want them to be treated when they're having an episode of significant anxiety? How would you want them to be treated if they're, going through a life crisis? Be a good human.
Totally.
Do you think we overcomplicate this in terms of this conversation, which these conversations are hard, they're scary.
Yeah.
They're not normal conversations that we have every day, thank goodness. Or maybe we need to have more of them every day. But do you think we overcomplicate them?
I think there are some managers that have an innate ability to go to discomfort and sit and share that space with someone. And I also think there are others that are not wired that way. And we're seeing in the workplaces, the fact that we have to have posters up about kindness, kindness being a additional consideration for people rather than kindness being innate within the human reality of care for one another. They shouldn't be that complicated, but if you're working remotely, if you do not see your manager very often, there's a lot in a void that goes missing, that people don't have that consistency. And I think that that's one of the things that's happening now, is it's easier to hide your distress as an employee if you're working remotely.
Okay.
Because you can keep it behind you, off camera. Whereas it's harder again going in face to face when you've done a night in an emergency department or someone's needing support in a mental health tribunal situation and you've got to be work ready at work. You can sort of fumble through when you're working remotely.
Yeah.
A bit easier.
Hadn't thought about that. Isn't that terrible? That's really, really, really helpful. So let's go to the scenario let's go back to the disclosure piece. If you're caring for your loved one and you've had, as you said, a night in the emergency department, you're about to front up a tribunal, and you've reached the point where, you can't mask anymore, you need to hopefully have a conversation that's trusted and that's treated with empathy and compassion with someone in your workplace. What's a good response when you actually disclose?
This has happened to me this year. As you know, I've worked for myself for a long, long time, but I've joined an organisation and now the poor people, they have to deal with the free range from hell. And so, that conversation came in the form of me needing to write out very clearly the emotional load impact that was sitting there, the personal stress meter going up with the sense of responsibility within the role, and literally saying, here's what I can do. And I am in a situation where I will walk away if I have to, because my priority is supporting someone. And this is the thing too, it's not a choice, you have to do it, because there are not the psychosocial supports for families out there. Sure, we did NDIS, but we still have a massive amount of missing middle. And we find now that people with psychosocial disability are finding it more difficult, for example, to get an NDIS package.
Yeah.
And that means that the impact is flowing onto families. So you'll take on a role, I've done some modelling on this, you'll take on a role as a SHADS worker, which is a community sector worker, that is equivalent, if we look at all the carers in Australia, to $23 billion a year of unpaid volunteered care.
Wow.
So when we're talking about productivity...
That's just for mental health
carers, it's
wow.
close to 300 million
wow.
when you expand it out for the disability sector and the aged and frail people. So it's that caring is coming at a cost, but it's not the government's cost or it's not an organisation's cost. It's actually the unpaid workers that have had to make decisions such as, I'm giving up 3 days a week because I have to. There is nothing outside of here for me to be supported for carers. And there's this misunderstanding that if I help the person who's got the illness, by default, shouldn't that have a big enough ripple effect to satisfy the family? No, because every person in that dynamic has a unique right to have their own human rights met. The ability to work, the ability to take up study, the ability to have time for themselves. And sadly, Georgie, they're people like me, women, 60s, who are doing the hard yards on this, and they are scraping often. They are facing homelessness because of the lack of continuity of work, safety, and a sense that their job will be there if they can go back. And they don't get the superannuation.
I was going to say, like entering into retirement with
Oh,
little or
nothing.
no superannuation. Yeah.
The mothers that I know that are particularly looking after adult children, and it tends to be gendered, sadly, it is. And that's not to say that men don't, really do some beautiful work in that sort of caring space. They do. But it tends to be the woman who gives up their career, their roles to care for someone. And it's very, very tough. We need to be aware of that.
So back to this question. You disclose to your manager, this is what's going on in my life.
Yeah.
What does good look like?
Good looks like stopping, breathing with that person to just own that moment of honesty, vulnerability, and the idea that trust is coming your way. Because you've got to test that. And if that person can just sit with you and go, wow, okay, I don't need to know everything. It's not about me needing to know everything. Because the challenge is often that carer may not have permission to share the story of someone. And quite rightly, the vulnerable person who's recovering from an illness or is going through crisis, they're not pity fodder. They need their dignity and their respect maintained. So, it's very, very different from other types of constructs of illness. Yeah. Where people are almost heroed because they care for someone with other types of
cancer or
crisis illnesses. But in this case, it's what did you do often to have this situation happen to you? So good would look like sit there, don't freak out, don't immediately look for the policy, but have that human moment with that person and just go, I can't imagine. I can't imagine. I don't have the words. But I'm willing to listen and I'm willing to think about how we, to your point earlier, how do we move the chessboard in this way for the moment? When I wrote to my CEO and said, too many balls up in the air and I'm worried about my own health and I'm worried about the person I'm caring for's health, they did that. What do we need to do? Because I'm not taking a resignation from you.
And so that looks like a combination of, again, depending on the business, because, small business owners
that's tough.
Don't have a lot of flexibility often, as opposed to kind of bigger organisations. So the combination of, how do we adjust your hours? How do we give you as much flexibility as we can accommodate? How do we redesign your role potentially? How do we,
educate other people around.
Other people around. Leave without pay.
Yeah.
These are the combinations of things we've got. Is there anything that kind of you've come across that you've thought, wow, if we were to kind of embed that in policy or implement this kind of idea, something really left field and creative that you've heard about over the years?
Well, they're only my fantasies. I haven't seen much in evidence.
Well,
but
you've got the mic.
Yeah. Well, I honestly believe that we need to rethink what we are calling productivity.
Excellent.
We need to think about the line items within the productivity GDPs. We've got to think about caring is contributing to the wider society. And so if I'm taking a hit financially to be a carer in this space, then that needs to be recognised. And I get a little bit annoyed when I hear about, we've got a productivity issue when it comes to people who are supporting others with me. You've never seen a more productive group of people. They are going above and beyond. Measure that. Measure what it's like, 24 hours of care. Measure what it's like to sit with someone and save the government needing to put the right people in place within a community setting that stops them from going to hospital. Do a measurement of the days that families have stopped someone presenting in a hospital or in an ED because they are effectively doing either community work in the home or hospital in the home to keep people safe. So I did a little back of envelope of some of the times and the money that would be contributing. This year, I think I've gifted probably about $18,500 in savings.
What, bed days?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That is not the actual, that's loss of income.
Okay, all right.
Savings to the system.
Yeah.
As in per day out of a hospital. And the auxiliary type of support around you, that if someone on an NDIS package has got a support worker coming in 3 days a week, if you were to replace it with the same dollar factor, it's thousands and thousands. Yet I can't put that on a tax form. I can't declare that as legitimate paid contribution to a sector or a system. And yet, when we think about those unpaid carers, there are no employee assistance programs when you take off time. The employee assistance program often do not have the right match of people that understand the uniqueness of what this takes. And we also have this sort of dilemma around frontline workers being given as much support as they can, and they have to. They live with moral injury, see things that they shouldn't have to see, but families are frontline often too.
Yeah. And when you're talking about frontline, you're talking about police emergency services.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this year, Georgie, I went to the Frontline Mental Health Conference. And there are some beautiful projects that are happening for people in the military, in Defence Force more broadly, that understand if you look after this person's family and this person, the ecosystem is safer for everyone. But that's not happening if you're outside of those domains. You know, we know ambulances and first responders that are paid to be first responders are often heralded as the heroes. And yet, as a family member, as a first responder taking someone to an emergency department, you are often considered to be noisy, nuisance, can't see the blood, you're in the wrong place, deal with it somewhere else. So, you know, if you start to put the models against each other, there's an absolute case to be said for if you understand theoretically and you've got the evidence to say wraparound for families, for first responders, has got a return on the relationships within the family dynamics, but a return on investment because we're keeping this person feeling connected, safe, in a compassionate space. Their family get them. But we don't do that for outside of first responders.
Dee, I'm a CEO, right? Big important person apparently.
Always.
What do you say to me if you come to me and you're employed at my organisation and you come to me and you say, I need to keep my young person alive or my person alive. You've got a management job. I can't do both. I need some flexibility. And I say to you, Dee, I am so sorry to hear that. But we've got to deliver this service to the community, or we've got to, deliver shareholder value, or, I just don't have the workforce to kind of make up the hours in your role. What about your team? I just don't think we can make it work, Dee. What do you say to me?
I would be saying...
What are you thinking?
Yeah, I would be thinking about the workload.
Yep.
I would go back into this sort of granular thinking. Let's get your work plan out for you and the team. Let's get that spreadsheet out and go, here are your core deliverables for the next 6 months. Here are the people that you are supporting for the next 6 months. How do we make sure we can deliver those things? Which are your passion areas that you think, I can't give that part up? So let's prioritise the pieces that bring you a sense of contribution and joy and reward in the job. And can we focus on those things for the short term? Now let's look at the staffing ratios here. And it really is about moving the chess pieces. What is really dangerous is to say, you take as much time as you need, we'll get someone else in that role, we'll backfill all of the sort of gaps that you're going to leave. See it potentially, if you can, when you come back, because that disconnects me from something that's a protective factor for me. So my protective factor is, I love my work. I love what I get to do and contribute. It's for purpose rather than for profit, often. And I need to be connected into the bigger cause. And if I can do some of that and I'm not disappeared while I'm gone, if I can be speaking to the team 3 times a week and saying, not so much what are you up to, but tell me what's working for you at the moment, and can I be a conduit? So you almost take on the role of keeping the glue together, but losing pieces of the deliverables and moving them around to other people. It's hard, Georgie, it's hard, particularly if you're in a senior role, to make that work. But I would definitely be saying we've got to have the level of flexibility that the individual person can say, this is my sweet spot.
So, and think longer term.
Yeah. And think that work is a protective factor.
Yeah.
And if you just sort of go, can't make that work for you, sorry, then you're taking away something from someone and you're leaving someone with this residue of going back to the person they love and trying to support them, being aggrieved, being quietly angry.
Yeah, and unproductive.
Yeah.
And potentially culturally damaging.
Yeah.
So we've had a lot of think again moments. Like you've made me think again about, how to think more creatively around negotiating flexibility. You've made me think again about, that unhidden value and the fact that, it's not just, it's on both sides of the ledgers. It's in terms of the lost productivity, but it's also in terms of your contribution as a carer to
society, more broadly.
The public purse, to the bottom line for business and to society more generally. Any other think again moments? Any other things that you want people to really question the status quo view of, and what do you want to challenge people's thinking about when it comes to carers and work? And
look, I would really love that, with embedded in the workplace culture is an understanding of the stresses of life for other people in all aspects of their life. And I think that if we lead often with a, why are we doing this? Why is it important? How do we frame the context of supporting people in a very pragmatic way? Simple term, begin a meeting. So-and-so's not here at the moment, which gives us the opportunity to stop, reflect and pause on the impact that is taking place, not necessarily just for that person, but thousands of others. So bring the uniqueness, the kindness, the context into business as usual type of activities. Reflect how well you're going if that person is staying connected. I mean, it's not unlike maternity leave for some people, where they feel they've either got the option to be half in and half out and forgotten about. It's about, if that person is valued, how do we keep them part of the fabric? How do we keep them connected? How do we do more than potentially send flowers and say, I know you're having a tough time. I'm doing the flower thing again, aren't I? Don't buy me flowers ever.
Note to self.
But yeah, it's it's like, how do we do that in with someone taking time off for maternity leave? How do we take aspects of good practice for that and put that into this space as well? And understand that, it is hard to fire on all cylinders when they're being burnt out. And so I sort of get a bit annoyed when I'm thinking about suicide prevention, and yet there are things that are happening in the moments that are not suicide prevention, because people don't understand, if you disconnect someone, there's a protective factor gone. If you stop the income for someone, there's a protective factor gone. And we know all of the links to this with suicide. but we still sort of see suicide prevention as a campaign that happens externally.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because I think, workplaces, are generally very, very concerned and wanting to play a role in suicide prevention. There's nothing worse than losing a colleague or a worker to suicide.
Yeah.
It stays with workplaces and teams, and it just is a
It's life altering.
It's a shocking experience, and I think again, I've spoken to so many bosses and managers and leaders over the years who that was their moment where they actually thought, I've got to think differently about this. What's the talk about, because I think it will be something that people won't understand. What are the risk factors for carers when it comes to suicide?
They're high. They're really high. On the scales, I'm lucky to be alive because I come from intergenerational trauma, suicide, bereavement. But the statistics go up. So very often, if someone's had some time outside of work for a suicide attempt, or they're re-entering the workplace, they are often sort of considered. So-and-so is coming back to work, we need to think about that. But we often don't think about the peripheral and the family.
Yeah.
And I think there's some cohorts that are particularly vulnerable. Older people with adult children is one of them. Who's going to look after my person?
Yeah.
So sadly, there becomes this sort of scary reality of there is no one to look after my person. And, without needing a trigger alert, it's not unusual for family members to suicide
and
as well.
And also those who are bereaved by suicide.
Absolutely.
So carers bereaved by suicide, yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Dee, you talked about the what does good look like. Let's talk about, let's take it one step further. What are the benefits of that boss sitting down, forensically going through your work plan, figuring out what an alternative path or plan might be? What's the benefit for the business of retaining someone like you?
I don't think you would get a more loyal and considered person if you went to that. The return on the relationship for going to that level, and the word of mouth of the culture of the workplace. If we're talking about employers of choice, would I work for them? Hell yes.
Yeah.
I don't ever want to leave them because they showed such a sign of good faith, that they saw my contribution as valuable. And also, very often, these people who are doing these roles, they're your people. They're your glue. They're often the connectors in the workplace. And you start to take them out and there are big holes. Not to mention the cost of replacement, which is significant. And making meaning of what someone actually does bring to the work is really, really important as a protective factor.
Yeah. Dee, my friend, it is always a pleasure to sit and chew the fat with you. I always learn so much from our time together. I love you dearly, and I think you're an incredible human being, and I think you've given me a lot to think about, and I'm sure our listeners as well. Thank you.
My pleasure, Georgie. Love spending time with you too.
Dee Backman-Hoyle, thank you as ever for throwing down the gauntlet today. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Think Again with Beyond Blue, giving you a fresh take on the big questions in mental health and wellbeing in Australia. You can rate and review us and find more episodes wherever you get your podcasts. And if this discussion raised any issues for you, don't forget the Beyond Blue support service is available free 24/7 on 1300 22 46 36, or visit our website.